and welcome to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast, Conversations With. And I got a wonderful conversation today with the authors of a terrific new book called Kids These Days, Will Dobud and Nevin Harper. Now, Will, he's been working with youth and families across the US, Australia and Norway for some 20 years. I got to know him as a developer of innovative programs that integrate psychotherapy and the outdoors to improve teenagers' experience when seeking mental health treatment. Will's research and teaching explore ways to improve the experience and effectiveness of mental health supports. He's co-host of the Adventure Therapy Collective podcast, co-author of Solution-Focused Practice in Outdoor Therapy, Co-Adventuring for Change, and Outdoor Therapies, an introduction to practices, possibilities, and critical perspectives. Will is senior lecturer at Charles Sturt University and lives and works between Australia and the Washington, D.C. area. Now, Dr. Nevin Harper is a professor in the School of Exercise Science, Physical and Health Education at the University of Victoria in Canada, and a registered clinical counsellor. His career has included working as a youth counsellor, outdoor skills instructor, shepherd, a wilderness guide, but more recently as author, researcher and consultant. Nevin's research examines human environmental interactions, primarily through the practices of outdoor therapies and nature-based therapies to healing and well-being. He lives on Vancouver Island in Canada. So I'm really looking forward to talking to these two wonderful gentlemen and their book, Kids These Days. Well, Will and Nevin, thank you so much for joining us. This is great. This is great. I just did a little introduction, and I said I've been following Will for a while, not in a sort of creepy way, in a very positive way. Nevin, you're new to me, but thanks for writing this book, guys. This is fabulous. Kids These Days. I'm just going to throw it over to you two to give a little bit of just a sort of an introduction into how it came together, how you two came together, and then we'll get stuck into some of the content and the juice of this book.
Sure. So I think the way the Nevin and Will origin story is actually very aligned to our origin story, Richard, where Nevin was doing outdoor therapy, outdoor education, adventure-based research, and we were in similar circles. And I found an article Nevin had written in 2010 called something like Adventure Education and Evidence-Based Practice, like a false idol, something like that. And I went, whoa. Someone in our field actually read The Heart and Soul of Change, and so Nevin and I started talking. We had obviously our outdoor therapy world is very small, so we knew of each other. And one of the first conversations we had, we were talking about the dodo bird effect in psychotherapy, and I kind of said off the cuff, I said to Nevin, we should actually probably test this because we're going around at conferences and talking about it, but like, seriously, what if the outdoors are just better than anything else? And I knew we wouldn't find that, but I thought, what if we're wrong? Because no one seems to believe us. They seem to think the trees are healing and, go outside and it'll cure all society's ills. And so we wrote a paper together in 2018, I'd say, called Of Dodo Birds and Common Factors, where we took all the kind of as close as we could get to clinical trials in outdoor therapy and looked at what the findings were. And we found exactly what we all know about psychotherapy, that simply adding nature to therapy did not improve outcomes. But we wrote it in a way that we said it also doesn't hurt outcomes. So there's no reason not to do outdoor therapy. It's just that our stories and how we talk about outdoor therapy seems a bit thin and narrow to what the research actually says. So we started there. We did an edited book called Outdoor Therapies. I think that came out in 2020. And that was just a big review of the different therapies. So things like horticulture, forest therapy, surf therapy, adventure, wilderness, nature-based integration, all these different kind of modalities. And that was a fun project for for our community and our little world. And at a conference in Norway in I think 2022, Nevin and I were sitting together with a bunch of people, and we were thinking, like, here we are all coming together about outdoor therapy stuff. But, like, why is it that there's more social workers, psychologists, counselors, more medications, more therapies, there's more trauma, more disorders, and we have all these new ideas, and everything just seems like it's getting worse. And so we just started there, and Nevin, I'll let you step in just about how we sort of started this process as well. But
Sure.
so, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, great,
So
Neville. I would just love that. Is that the way you saw it?
yeah, well, no, it is the way I saw it, and I think what stemmed from our conversation in Norway was a an ongoing dialogue. Obviously, we're in different places in the world. I'm in Canada and Will's down in Australia, but it makes for fruitful writing actually when someone's asleep. Like while I'm writing, Will is asleep. I send a draft. I wake up, it's edited and ready to go again. So we knew that that was working well with the edited book. And the questions that we came away from the Norwegian conference, and I can't remember the year, was that 22,
Yeah, 22 or
maybe
23. Yeah.
22 or 23, was it's not working. Something's not working, right? We have this perception of this increasing numbers around youth mental health, distress, anxiety, depression, um, teenage self-harm, suicide. And I just thought I'm going to take advantage of the network that I do have within academia and within practice and just start talking to people and say, look, we've been having this conversation. What do you think? So Michael Unger, he's a international social work resiliency researcher, well known. I think he's an author of 15 to 20 books.
Yeah.
I've had access to him through the outdoor adventure therapy world a little bit and have some common colleagues. So I get a hold of him, I interview him for an hour and a half, and I just let him run. Like, what's going on? What's happening here? And we actually started trying to write a book about boys. Like
Yeah.
there was an intention to talk about like young boys and men growing up in today's society, but it kind of went back to kids. It went to youth. It went to all kids. Listen to Michael Unger. Will and I had a chat, and it's like, oh my God, there's something here. There's people who are saying things in different fields and different areas of expertise that we are aligned with. Talked to Dr. Gordon Neufeld. He's an international parenting expert, well into his 70s now, and more than willing to say what he needs to say without concerns of any
Hmm.
retaliation. Speaks his truth. Dr. Sue Johnson, emotionally focused therapy. Like as we started talking to more and more individuals, Will and I are moving this information back and forth. We're watching these videos, we're listening to these elders in many of these fields, and we realized like this is about adults messing up the environments that kids are growing up in. And post book, we've come to the conclusion, and one of the sort of repetitive mantras right now is that this is about the adults. There is nothing in a child's world that wasn't in some ways created by the adults around them. Their social environment, their physical environment, the ideas, the interventions, what adults have chosen to measure, how they've chosen to measure it, the questions that they ask, and the ideas that they put into their heads. And so here we are almost 3 years later with a
Mm.
book that's about to be published within a week or so. And we don't know how the public will respond to it. We know how our colleagues have responded to it. We know how a few people that we care about their opinion have responded to it. And so far we're pretty happy. And we touch on a lot of topics that some people are talking about a lot, but only in one way. Some topics that people don't want to talk about at all.
Mhm.
And we tried to write, we'll find out soon enough, in what we're describing as the messy, nuanced middle. Like we recognize that some of these issues, like if we take the culture of safety, some people will say, you have to protect kids at all costs. And some will say, nah, let them roam. And this plays out as a debate as if there's a like just two polar opposite views when in fact there's a spectrum of ideas. And so we've tried to write it in a way that we could reach everybody to have more dialogue around these topics and hopefully move the needle on youth mental health.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many elements in there, and there's a couple of things I'll just reflect on just to allow encourage the listeners to also the watchers of this to just sort of expand their own thinking. But I mean, certainly one of the things, and I was mentioning to you before that you could call it kids these days, but and I think you have to. That's great. But actually, you could also call it adults these days.
Okay.
Because I'm a grandpa now, and so I'm watching parents of 5, 6, 7, 8 year olds, and some are great and some are terrible, and that's probably been true for a long, long time. And another distinction that I think is really important that you brought out right early in there, Will, and you were sort of supporting that, Nevin. I mean, the outdoors is great for you, and the lack of outdoors is a real problem in just general human functioning. I'm, as you know, neuroscience and geneticist, and the nature of way things do that. Also, parenting is a really natural process, and talk is a really natural process, and we need to have that sort of open conversational. But that's different from therapy. So nature as therapy and talk as therapy and somatic functioning and processes as therapy needs to be distinguished as something that has been thought about a little bit more. It's not just about it's about not regulating, but putting some framework and thought to those things that are natural. And as you say, well, so interesting that it isn't distinctly, you do a therapy, you take it outdoors, bing, everything's resolved. So it's not that is the issue on its own. And that's terrific. So adults these days, I want to get to a question now. Wilderness therapy you're talking about. Now, let's just get into the structure of the book. Those are a couple of reflections just to encourage people to reflect. Now, you divide it into 3 sections. I got interference, intervention, and ideology as the fundamental 3 sort of frameworks. Let's look at that interference thing first, because you hinted on that a little bit. Adults are the things to worry about. Kids are going through the same sort of stuff. But each generation goes through something different. I mean, I was looking at the book and I'm looking at some of the stuff you're talking about. I'm going, yeah, when I was a kid, I had this and my parents were this and other parents were that. And today we've got, so there's problems of phones and social media. Now that's different. It's got parallels going back to Socrates. I mean, he couldn't get them to question enough, and now we get them to question too much. So phones and play and some of that stuff. There's those things of, I love that thing you said about UNICEF, where they were saying, all the attempts to try and fix kids nowadays. So there's a few things I've just thrown in. Grab from that little catch bag of stuff something that resonates for you, and please speak to it.
Sure. So interference is the first part of the book. And yeah, we play the first chapter, we write about Socrates and the joke of Socrates saying, these kids are lazy, this and that. Our field of outdoor stuff, like Kurt Hahn, one of the founders of Outward Bound, like the Duke of Edinburgh Award, all these things we know about. He famously said in the 20s, kids are lazy and out of shape because of advanced locomotion. They're on stimulants and tranquilizers. Like today, we call that evidence-based practice, right? So this has gone on forever, right? But when it comes to interfering, the thing that we wrote in the first chapter that's a warning sign is if we keep shifting how the environment is constructed around kids while simultaneously categorizing everybody as normal or mentally ill, what we're seeing is culture changes the way we see these labels. So, it's not, we're only a stone's throw away from homosexuality being in the DSM, like what, I think 2 editions ago. So and that did not change because the American Psychiatric Association got together and unanimously thought, let's stop labeling people around this. The vote hardly passed. The majority of people who could vote on removing homosexuality from the DSM decided not to vote. And who stood up? The underdog, the people that were being labeled, stood up and advocated for themselves and made a societal change in things. Now, what happens with kids is we're seeing this is a big part of social media interfering with this. We're seeing today the labels and the disorders being thrown around, and then subsequently what ends up happening, it leads you towards medication. And as Nevin said, we're staying in the messy nuanced middle. We don't take any stance on being anti-psychiatry or pro-psychiatry. We take a very pragmatic view of, is this working? So we have enough antidepressant use to find it in the runoff of our water and to find it in the fish we eat. And still, what are we doing? We're trying to find out, how can we allow, in Australia, how can we get general practitioners to diagnose and medicate quicker? So it's like, is this working? Simultaneously, you see the rise of technology and the phones. We're living a more sedentary life. This comes with problems. Look no further that we have a chapter about environmental toxins, which is not something I thought I would ever write about. But the reason that chapter became so important is, look at how we try to help kids. We go, we need more free range parenting. Okay, nope, we need more restrictive parenting. Okay, we need to ban social media. Okay, we've done that. And then simultaneously, we got lead in like everything, and we have all these toxins around us. We're using herbicides everywhere, and we know that this is making us sick. And so Nevin and I kind of took and I'll pass over to you, Nevin, in a second. We kind of took this approach that there is so much more to this story than we really think is going on. And so when it comes to interference, it's easy to take one thing. The phones are the scapegoat of today, right? So it's easy to grab onto the phones and say, if we just get rid of this, all mental health will be fine. While simultaneously, we're also interfering in all these other ways throughout their life. So it's not just one thing. So interference was a section about how are we interfering with that adventure that is growing up.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I took note of that, the adventure of growing up, the long histories through indigenous teachings that we see of the quest. I mean, going back to Joseph Campbell, who talked about it, going back to mythologies, and the lack of quest. I mean, the biggest quest nowadays is to make 1 million before you're 22. Which is really, though, what Epicurus was saying back then when he said these 3 things, happiness, connection with people, but be free of the state, which was to be free of the necessity to be controlled, which of course has been broadly interpreted as money, whereas he said no, actually I mean, it's hysterical. He's sort of Epicurean for food, but actually he made a commune and they just sort of ate roots and berries. But these confusions we have, and this Nevin, this very linear thinking of, if we fix this, that'll make the change. But exactly as Will's just alluding to there, that all these things are together, and it's systemic or systematic too, in that true thing of complex systems. It's really hard. As Will's talked about some of the mess. And you try not to take a stance, but what are some of the ways in which the mess can be? Is it unraveled? Is it repaired? Is it modified? What are some of the ways you address this?
Yeah, we do and we don't. There's a natural tendency in writing in a project like this to say it is the cell phones and social media. So these are the 4 steps you have to take to undo that problem.
The four
It
steps, we
is,
love those, don't they?
yeah, the 10 rules, the 4 steps, the propositions, the whatevers. We didn't conclude the book with that. We concluded the book with an opportunity to take a perspective on society to see what is working, which is obviously someone, or almost always someone that's doing something different, which means they could be actually doing something against a mainstream narrative or doing something radically different. And they're referred to as the positive deviance. Now, that is just a way to end a book and bring closure to it because the book is so full of potential problems and potential solutions. And that's what makes the book a little bit complex. And in the beginning, that's what made it really difficult to find a publisher because most wanted one subject that could be honed in on that has a resolution. And that way you can say, this is the problem. And everybody's like, yes, that's the problem. And these are the solutions. And the book has the solution, so we better buy it. Whereas we went to 40,000 feet and we said, there's a lot of problems. And we framed the trouble with youth today around this concept of wicked problems. And they're defined as those that are multivariable. You could intervene in many ways at many levels. And the problem might even go away, but in the end, you might not know which of your interventions was actually successful. We're basically trying to make the point that there's a very complex world that children grow up in. Again, problematizing some of the things that adults do to children, like create environments that are full of toxins. The kids didn't do that. And one of the things we're seeing now is that when we've brought this up, we've got people reading in psychology, in education, in parenting, in early childhood development, and social work, and therapy. And they're saying, I didn't even think about the toxins angle. Now, when you look at the health outcomes for a lot of those toxins, whether it's plastics, whether it's agricultural, components, whether it's fertilizers or pesticides, what you see are behavioral changes, neurological changes, lowered IQ, and a lot of these things you can almost line them up to ADHD in the classroom, So what have we done as adults? What have we done? We've created a very wicked problem that adults are also choosing to measure and label and pathologize and medicate in certain ways. And so when we really dug into each of the chapters, and Will reminded me on the last podcast we did that the toxins chapter actually was about 3 times the length of what it is now, because it just became so complex. And the person that we researched with on that chapter was Dr. Bruce Lanphier from Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. He's trying to write a book to conclude sort of his knowledge mobilization on that topic alone. And I don't know whether he dropped them as hints, but we ended up recognizing that, okay, we've also got regulatory bodies that are supposed to protect us as citizens. We've got corporations that are trying to make money. And so we, as much as we didn't want to write a book just about the collusion side of it, we could have. Because in every single topic that we talk about, there's all these second and third angles to it. Our most common diagnostic tool for anxiety and depression, the PHQ-9. 9 simple questions, very common questions, simple questions about sleep and mood. If you're feeling, let's back up. I'm going to back the example up. Say something happens at school and your teacher is talking to you about how sad that day was. You were talking to us before, Richard, about your grandson and how sad he might have been. A teacher might take that as far as recommending the child go to the school counselor. There may end up being a conversation about depression. There may end up being a questionnaire given, maybe not for that small of a child, but you know what I'm saying? Like there's this lowered bar of entry and a really slippery slope into, I think I might be depressed. I talk to a doctor. I do a PHQ-9. I end up with medication when I leave the office. Pathologizing, labeling, pathologizing, self-identifying, labeling, pathologizing, medicating. And then overall, the stats continue to show things getting worse. So do we have a fabricated problem? Do we have a real mental health crisis? Or is it really the way that we talk about things, the way that kids are learning about things, the way that parenting maybe has changed, education has changed, the food and environment has changed. Like that's the concept of a wicked problem. We got lots of work
Mhm.
to do, but we're not willing to say it's this or it's that. It's this and maybe that and maybe that and maybe that.
Yeah,
And
that's great.
can I jump in really quick, just really quickly, Richard? We're in Australia. This is an interesting one. There's an article in the Guardian. It came out in just a few weeks ago, so in September 2025, that showed a small town, small rural community. The mining company in that town had to do a report to report concentration of lead in the blood of young people. And it came out that for First Nations young people, elevated rates and there's no safe level of lead allowed, elevated levels of lead in 75% of Indigenous youth, 50% of non-Indigenous youth in this small community. And the investigative journalist who wrote this article found that the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, said, "Don't worry, we'll store this information, but there will be no," I think this is a direct quote, "no media fanfare about this finding." So one of the things, and this is Nevin and I kind of as we're thinking about, in many ways, thinking about who wants these narratives to continue. Who needs this story not told? Where does this? Because in that way, it's sort of a, Paris Hilton called our book a protest book, right? And so one of the things that um, we read about is, and obviously not this story from a month ago, but one of the things with the lead and this collusion to protect corporate interest. Still, though, we can react and ban social media in like The Anxious Generation comes out in April of last year. The federal government in Australia makes a social media ban by November. So this hyped story, but we can still poison you. Like that, this is like the dissonance that didn't add up for us when we were writing, where we were going, this actually just living in this, where we all say evidence-based times. There's a lot of evidence-based discussions we could have that aren't making it to the mainstream.
And I want to just go back to something that you talked about in the book. They had a resonance because probably because I'm grandfathering, but you related learning to walk and the nature of
Mhm.
being an adolescent. It was really interesting, and I just
Mhm.
wonder who's going to share that one.
Well,
Who's
I'll start with where this idea came from, and I'll let Nevin tell the
right?
story. I remember coming from my solution-focused background. Um, I went through a phase where I read all the Milton Erickson books, and I remember there's a story in I see it on my voice will go with you. There is a
Yeah,
story about learning to walk where, and Milton Erickson was a good storyteller. So, whatever we think of Milton Erickson today. So, but Milton Erickson said, there's nothing much harder that you'll ever do in your life than learning how to walk. And everybody around you just let you fail. They let you mess this up. And today, you know, when you become an adult, you'll never think about walking again. You'll never imagine how hard it would be if we all had it, like going to our deliberate practice route. Imagine if we all had a walking coach. It'd be brutal because then we'd have to be conscious about this thing. We'd have to be thinking about so your child and as an infant is doing this incredible thing that you cannot help them do better. You can create a space where they don't hit their head on a sharp object. You block off the stairs. But the truth is, there's nothing you can do to say, hey, actually, that walking technique really sucks. You need to fix this, right? Anyway, Nevin, why do we talk about that when it comes to teenagers?
Well, I think you've set it up quite well in the messaging. Like we have so many messages coming at young people from so many different directions, and many of them are very empowered messages. I work was formerly a school of education. We've moved into a faculty of health now. Um, Watching the training of young educators coming out of university and into the school system, knowing then that they're going to be the responsible adult in the room with a lot of young people, some of the ideologies around things like safety and social emotional learning, there's concepts there, and we go, yeah, of course that makes sense. We want places to be safe. We want safe spaces. That makes sense. Like ideologically, it makes sense. But then how far does it go? And in the adolescent frame, we know that kids are being taught in ways that are being very protective. And that safety has gone to the extent of being protected from diverse opinions or having to defend positions and have arguments. And so that we've almost removed any conflict or opportunity for conflict to be resolved in terms of skill building. An example on the safety front is student accommodations at schools and in universities. So the numbers of youth that are young people that are recognized as having some type of they don't want to use the word disability, but some learning challenge that's showing up for them. They get to go to the Learning and Assessment Center. They meet with a counselor. They have a learning plan put together, and then it's shipped out to the instructor. The instructor is essentially told, these are the accommodations you have to make for the student in your classroom. You're not in relationship with them because they're probably brand new to you and you might have hundreds of students in the room. But you see the list of accommodations and they have to be met. And some of them are, this student shall not be called upon in class. This student shall not have to make a presentation in front of the class. And so you have to remember who that student is among the many and try not to call upon them. But I'm seeing in the last few classes I taught, probably 2 in 10, so maybe like 20% of the class is actually coming with some type of accommodation. And then I, as the instructor, have to keep track of. So I'm trying to keep everybody safe from discomfort. That's gone too far because there's no remediation. There's nothing in that plan that says after 3 weeks, you will meet with the student again and make a plan to be called upon in class or to be able to make a presentation. So we've really protected them. And we now have students graduating from programs after 4 years of education, from 18 to 22, 23 years of age, who maybe have never made a presentation in a class, have never been called upon in a class. And the resiliency expert, Michael Unger, he's like, I want students in my class to be nervous about being called upon. I want them to be prepared and I want them to feel challenged. Like that is where growth occurs, right? So we're in this position where we've maybe gone with some things a little too far. Mm-hmm. I've lost track of the question and what I was.
No, that's right. We'll run. Yeah, Will, you.
I was just going to say, it's kind of like the approach we take with the safety is obviously when you get into ideological conversations, it turns into the kids are all weak because of all these accommodations and look at how fragile everybody is. And our approach was really to say, let's meet people where they're at, but let's not stay there. Let's go somewhere together. So I think that really fit into our experiential background, that I'm interested in what people are experiencing. And so when a client comes to me and they say, I have depression, we all know what that word means to one person is something totally different to the other. And so I'm interested in, okay, I'll meet you here. And where are we going from here? So the ideology of safety, one of the things we found is it just assumes that children need this protection because they won't be able to handle it otherwise. And so instead we go, how can we set up an environment where kids can take risks, where they can learn to walk in a safe enough place? Because we know they're going to have to fall in order to build the muscle, to build the, to build all the memory of how to do this thing. And so we need to set up something where they can fail, while scaffolding that they're also getting better. They're getting better at this thing over time. So we're going to meet them where they're at. You're a crawling infant. Maybe we'll help you up. Maybe when we watch you, we'll have our hands around so we can catch you if you do fall. And then maybe we'll let you go and go do something. And so with teenagers, what we found, going back to interference, is there just might be a bit too much adult instruction here. There might be a bit too much adult interference. And now and yeah, do this, do that, all the different
Yeah.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true and so important. I mean, the in one of your other book titles is a word that I've been, sort of really working hard on in the last decade, possibility. Uh,
Mm.
and the true nature of that in relation to using systems theory as the framework. But I was talking to a group the other day about a few months ago. But I was saying that moment of walking is one of the greatest expressions of the emergence of possibility in a child's life, because
Mm.
they are standing there and they have no idea what walking is. They have no concept of walking. It exists within their potential, but not within their practice. They get up and then they tito and boomf. And the look on their faces when they do that is extraordinary. And exactly as you say, we're running around saying, "Oh, you better be safe. Don't do this. Be careful of that." And I'm sitting there going, "Wow, that's fantastic. Let's see what happens." and and when I'm down the play park with my grandkids and all the other kids around the place, it's absolutely normal for me to be in the sand pit doing something, and within about 10 minutes, there's 8 kids all on our sandcastle. Because there's hopefully it's because I exude the adventure, the what you were talking about. You're allowed to
Mhm.
adventure. You're the and we're not worried about where the sand goes. We'll get that
Well,
out. We'll get that
Yeah.
out later.
this goes into something really important about how Nevin and I approach this book because we do get quite critical about some things that most people would say. I was talking to a friend over the weekend about this, and she said, "I can't believe you're so not you're so skeptical of all these social media bans. Like, I thought you as an outdoors person, you would go, oh, it's good to get off your phone and go outside and go play around in the trees." And I said, I know, but it's just about the narrative about this is where I'm critical of this. The other one we hear all the time is the kids don't play outside anymore. So they don't play outside. So once we get rid of the phones, all of a sudden they'll learn how to play outside, right? Now, I am a professional at playing outdoors. And we've been together many times. Nevin knows I have the energy like you do, Richard. I just elude play outside, messing around. Don't take yourself too seriously. So many of our kids, when we have this story, the kids are just on their phone and they don't go outside. The actual question we should be asking is, have I, the adult, given young people something to imitate? And the kids will play when the environment has adults that have shown them how to do this. The kids will naturally do it, but if we've overprotected play, the kids don't know how to do it. You know,
Yeah.
Nevin wrote the example in the book of if you look at a group of puppies, they're fighting, they're play fighting, and one takes it too far, and then they learn about where the line is. So that dogs that are great at playing are really good at mouthing, which is pretending to bite you, but not biting you. So it looks rough, but it's actually just evolutionarily mammal. It's just
Mhm.
mammalian behavior. So instead of us having, as we've talked about with adults these days, instead of us having the goggles pointed at what's wrong with the kids and why aren't they doing the things that I think kids should be doing, it's mostly because of something adults have constructed here. That if the
Mhm.
kids don't know how to play, like I heard this on the radio here, that the kids need to stay out till the street lights come on. That's what I did when I was a kid. And I was like, my dad said that to me. And I grew up on like a Leave It to Beaver cul-de-sac with a park and playground at the bottom of the street. Like, we were outside every day and it still wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for the adults those days, you know? And so, but the other thing is, let's say we did that. All of us collectively said, from now on, we're going to plop our kids outside until the street lights come on. Are they going to just suddenly find other kids? Like our kids would sit on the street corner and, oh, no, nothing to do here. So we
Yeah.
haven't created the environment by giving them more things to imitate that we can do. So your story
Hmm.
of being in the sandbox with the kids, those kids will know how to stay in the sandbox without adults in the future. And that's an emotional playground, you know? That's where
Yeah.
they can go feel it.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was thinking. Well, the emotional playgrounds, that was a term that came forward from Gordon Neufeld, who wrote a very instrumental parenting book called Hold On to Your Kids in
2005?
early 2000s.
Yes.
He co-authored it with Gabor Mate. He was talking about this in a way that I found very abrupt and I really, really appreciated. And I think that's part of the reason why we really enjoyed listening to the people that we interviewed over and over and over again. Um, he questioned the introduction of social emotional learning to kids too young in a way that really made sense. And I think it's a good example of how some ideas, and again, in education, if we think about that system, which is not always a cooperative system, it's a pretty uncooperative system when it comes down to it. It's too large and it's bulky and it's not nuanced enough. Teachers have too many kids in a classroom, especially thinking early years classrooms, early grades. Someone in that classroom is having an emotional, difficult time. They're not regulated. The teacher does not have the capacity to disengage from 29 students to sit with and be with a young person having those full emotional experiences. They don't have the capacity for that. They don't have the time or energy for that. If they did, the young person would be like, okay, I'm safe. I'm in safe enough. I'm in relationship here. There's an adult here looking after me. I'm having my big feelings and then I'm calming down because I'm co-regulating with this adult. And now I'm okay. And now we can get back to class and we can move on. What a brilliant learning experience for that individual. Growth will happen. For every other child in that classroom watching it, growth will happen. And yet, teachers now instead are training 30 young people to meditate and box breathe and get Zen in the classroom so that they can regulate themselves when their autonomic nervous systems might not even be capable of that yet. And it's similar to the parenting tactic of you go to your room and calm down, and we'll deal with this when you're better, like when you're calmed down.
Hmm.
We've missed a developmental opportunity for someone to sit in an emotional playground, experience the full lividness of that feeling, understand it, unpack it with someone, an older, wiser one in relationship, and then move on. So growth opportunities are being missed by an idea, social emotional learning, as a three-letter packaged sellable training course, has just come down too far in the developmental line. Like it's just being offered I think one of our chapters is called "You Don't Teach Zen to a 5-year-old," right?
Yeah.
High
And
school, junior high, great. Great emotions are running still, but I can self-regulate. So let's talk about how to learn these social emotional skills at 10, 12, 13 years of age, but not at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age, right?
we got the problem kids, we've got the problem adults, but we've got a problem world. And this is one of the things you do, Neville, when you talk about in your description, that looking at this human environment, meaning everything that is outside of the individual interaction and the struggle in there, is have I opened a sort of a reasonable sort of platform there for you, just to give a sort of a summary? I give a bit of a look at what I want to leave the audience with type of place.
Well, I think we have a problem world in the sense of what makes the news are stories about the kids being delinquents, being anxious. We have, the best-selling nonfiction book of last year was called The Anxious Generation. Like there's all these problems, and that tends to get our attention, you know. If we look at the news and political news, we're more divided than ever, this and that. But stories of, I mean, Nevin and I, you said to us before we hit record, Richard, it's amazing that you're still friends after writing. Like, we don't agree on everything, but that makes for a fruitful working relationship. And I learned things like I would have thought never in my life would I write a chapter about environmental toxins or about social emotional learning. Not things I lose sleep over or think about, but the greatest thing are stories of when we need to, speaking to scales or mobile, we need to balance things out with kids do amazing things. I think I'm going to ruin this because the headline's not in front of me. A 13-year-old in Denmark created a solar powered blanket so homeless people could have a warm blanket in the winter in Scandinavia, right? We had a school here in Australia in Port Macquarie, a school here. The kids had one of the kids in their class. This is called the nature school. A kid in their class needed a prosthetic arm. And so this kid came to school with this new plastic arm, right? And the student taught the other students about how it was 3D printed, this prosthetic arm. So the kids said, "Hey, teach, can we screw math lessons and learn how to 3D print prosthetic arms?" I think that sounds like a really cool thing to help other kids. You know, kids these days, right?
Mm.
And so they're fundraising now so that they can think about all the skills the kids will learn. 3D printing, modern technology, how to count, what ingredients are we putting in, mechanics, how is this thing they're basically learning engineering, like
Mm.
in middle school to help other people. So that's knowing those stories. This is what we call the positive deviance. If we look at how we've categorized mental illnesses, it's often from people who are deviating from the cultural norm. But there might be people deviating from the cultural norm and getting better outcomes for it. And so if we can find them, we can highlight those stories. That becomes the new middle, is not getting pulled to the different polarized angles. So it's even though it's fun to talk about what some of these things that don't work because it's like when you read the research, it's just so shockingly obvious. But then you also need the counterpart of what's the way out. And the way out is actually not being too nervous to look for the deviations, to look for the deviants that are bucking the mainstream and getting these amazing outcomes. I don't know, Nevin, do you want to say something about to wrap up our book?
Yeah, I think that final piece on positive deviance, I think we set it up in a way that also gives people um, a pause for sometimes your messages will go unheard. Sometimes you just need to keep trying the Semmelweis hand washing
Mm,
narrative. That it's not always going to be just as easy as speaking up, but you need to find ways to find your voice for the sake of protecting kids. And that means sometimes saying unpopular things. I've just learned recently there was an expose article last August 2024 here in Canada on the use of a particular herbicide across the forests of Canada, with the exception of one province. It's a product by name that many people know. It's called glyphosate. It's used in Roundup, which is a product from Monsanto, which has been rebranded now. I don't know their new name. Um, Most European nations will not allow this product because they know how bad it is for the health in terms of relationships to cancer. It's an endocrine disruptor. It has all these horrible side effects. This expose piece showed, and I only just read this a couple weeks ago, so it's still a little bit hot for me,
mm,
is sprayed all over the forest since the 1970s in Canada. So we clear cut and then we send people in to plant trees. The seedlings must be Roundup Ready protected. Then they herbicide the ground so nothing competes with those seedlings. So you have a monocrop. But glyphosate also works for farmers to dry crops out quicker so they can get their harvest off the field. So we're creating a toxic forest, which could create health problems for all those neighboring communities. And it's potentially increasing the rates of forest fires that we're seeing in the last decade. So I hear about that and I go, No mainstream media. One article came out in a literary magazine with probably a smallish distribution. I only just see it a year later, and I'm going, why aren't we all enraged by this? Where is the public voice on this? So we need more people speaking up if they think something needs to be said. I again, when we talk about things in the university, the accommodations finally has become a big issue for the faculty because there's so many of them, and it's a workload issue. So then the union gets involved, and then suddenly we start talking about it more openly, and people are saying, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be giving so many accommodations. Maybe we should tell these students, you don't need an accommodation, but you need to go talk to your instructor. And then they can be in relationship, meet them where they're at, have a conversation about what their needs are, and see if we can meet their needs in the classroom without just giving them a crutch to say never do a presentation or to never be called upon in class.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This thing. I mean, my career background was acting, and I actually did a workshop saying almost everything I know in psychotherapy I learned in acting school.
Mhm.
And that thing was never to find the person who could do the perfect Hamlet, but it was how do you find your Hamlet? Uh,
Mhm.
and how do you find the things? And I remember in rehearsing one thing's "Get thee to a nunnery" is one of the famous little lines, and I spent most of the time trying to figure out, come on, there's another way of saying this that comes from me. And it actually was sort of on kind of dress rehearsal. It's a bit naughty to do things on dress rehearsal to your other actors. But I found I finally said it in a way that had never been said before, and emerged out of me like some kind of like, wow, well done. Now I don't know whether anybody liked it or whether it was, going to go in the books, but it was so cool experience for me. And I get this with kids. I had my little grandson yesterday. We're doing something. I wanted to see if I could get him to hold his pen a bit different. And he said, "Oh no, you do it, puppy." And I thought, "Oh God, you idiot, Richard! You've just actually turned him off, made him feel like he's failing or not success." And so I said, "No, you keep doing it and whatever." And but it's that responsiveness I'm writing an article on sensitivity now. That's gone away. We're sensitive to compliance and are
Mhm.
you going to and although these discussions would go on forever,
Yes.
but I just wanted to add those little thoughts of mine at the end, not as contradictions, or anything
No.
of that, but just to say to the listeners out there, come on, these guys have just told us stuff. Start sparking. What are the possibilities that
Mhm.
we can engage with? Is it to take stands and make noise about things that are important? Is it to actually calm ourselves down and reframe, what safety is? Is it about looking at comparisons between us and our kids? Is it about sitting down 3 or 4 generations together and talking about the similarities and differences? All these things that you've given us opportunities to to get a sense of and to think about and get our backs get our the backsides in our brains off the chair.
Mhm.
That's what
Mm.
excites me about this conversation, and I
Well,
don't I, I don't want to end on my words. So, Will, it just
no,
something to let us go.
you raised something about how we approach, because Nevin already said we didn't find 7 habits, 5 steps, 12 rules, any of these things that make for best-selling books. But one of the things, one of our mantras with trying to write this, and we we kind of kicked off this writing process when we figured out the guardrails. Like, what do we not want to do here? And one of it was kind of not telling adults what to think. That you can, there's everything. I mean, we're all academics here. It's referenced. Hopefully you can. I tried my best when we found a reference that it was as open access as we could, not behind the
Mhm.
bullshit peer review paywall. We wanted adults to go, okay, I see this a different way. What am I going to do now? And so that could be any of the wonderful things you just said. Maybe I do want my kid to spend more time with a grandparent. Maybe I'm going to have to challenge myself at the playground that not everything is dangerous play. Maybe I need to be a bit skeptical when I send my child to therapy and really make sure I'm keeping my eyes on when is this helping my kid and when is this not helping my kid. And maybe similar, I've been on talking about wilderness therapy before on this podcast. You know, maybe even though there's really nice brochures and I'm going to mortgage my house to have my kid kidnapped to the woods, maybe I need to trust when my kid says that's not going to help me, that this is not going to help them. Um, and so we wanted the reader to go, oh, I didn't see that from this angle, and then feel equipped to go, what am I going to do about that now? And so that's sort of I think what you just said, it sparked in me like it's not telling everybody what to do, but it's also that we kind of need to question some of the dominant discourses about what's going on with kids because those discourses aren't helping, or they might help. They're not helping at a universal level. So
Maybe we can make them help better. Yeah.
yes, ideally. But Richard, thank you so much for having us. It was a real treat.
Yeah, I
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Yeah, absolutely my pleasure. And I think this is going to get some neurons firing. I really hope so. So, Nevin, Will, thank you so much for your time and your energy and for writing this book together and staying friends so that you'll write another one.
We will.
Bye for
All right,
now.
thanks, Richard. Take care.